Was I wrong to say it out loud, or was I wrong to believe that a room full of people would just laugh and move on? I told myself it was a joke, that bragging about how his best friend once kissed me at a house party in front of everyone, including my husband, was just being honest and bold. But I never expected the silence that came after, or what that silence cost our marriage and everyone I thought was still on my side. My name is Desta Farrow. I am 32 years old, and I work as a copywriter and brand consultant at a shared co-working studio in the middle of the city. And for as long as I can remember, I have believed that the boldest person in the room is always the most powerful one. My colleagues at the studio have a nickname for me. They call me the Mouth, and I wear it like a badge because I think it means I say what other people are too afraid to say out loud. I am married to Nate, who is 35 and works as a project coordinator at an urban planning firm downtown, and he is the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, who folds things carefully, who arrives on time without making a production of it. I used to think that steadiness was boring. I used to think that his patience meant he had nothing going on inside. I was wrong about that, but I did not know it yet on the afternoon that everything started moving toward where it ended. It began on a Tuesday when I finished a brand presentation at the studio and got a message from my friend Lena asking if I would do a toast at Dominic's birthday party on Saturday. Dominic is a graphic designer who has been friends with both Nate and me for years, and the party was going to be on a rooftop garden bar called the Galleria, with string lights and 40 guests, and the kind of warm evening that makes people feel like anything they say will be forgiven by morning. I typed back a fire emoji and immediately opened my notes app and started drafting something I had been turning over in my mind for weeks. A toast that included the detail that Marcus Osei, Nate's closest friend from university, had kissed me at a house party 6 months ago. I thought this was honesty. I thought this was boldness. I saved the draft and did not read it back critically because in my mind it was already finished and already brilliant. Nate arrived at the studio lobby at 6 to walk home with me, holding a paper bag from the deli and wearing his work jacket, and the studio manager Hessa said something warm to him as he came through the door, and he smiled at her in a way that gave me a small, unreasonable pulse of irritation I did not stop to examine. We walked the riverside embankment path with Zara's small backpack over his shoulder. Our 4-year-old daughter had been at the studio creche during the afternoon, and about halfway along the river, with the last of the daylight on the water and joggers passing us in both directions, Nate brought up a tagged Instagram story. 3 nights earlier, I had been photographed on a rooftop bar on Marsden Street, laughing with my arm through Marcus's, our heads almost touching. Nate said he had assumed I was at a late client call that evening. He was not accusatory. His voice was even and genuinely curious. He asked how long the evening had been and whose idea the Marsden bar was. I told him I had run into Marcus by coincidence at post-launch drinks for a mutual contact, and that I had sent him a voice message explaining it, which he apparently had not listened to. I showed him the message on my phone. It was 12 seconds long. It had been sent at 11 at night, after the photo was already posted and time-stamped. He looked at the timestamp without saying anything for a moment, and then he asked, carefully, if she could walk him through the order of events. Not accusing her of anything, he said, just trying to follow it. I told him he was being ridiculous, that I was not his employee, and that treating my social life as something that required a debrief was behavior I was not going to encourage. He stopped walking then and turned to face me, and he said he wanted us both to go to Saturday's party together, as a couple, without this weight between us, and he was asking for honesty now, so the evening would not carry this tension into a room full of people we both cared about. He said, if there was something about the time she spent with Marcus that she found difficult to explain, he wanted to know that, not because he would punish her, but because he needed to understand what he was actually part of. I told him that expecting a social itinerary was a form of control, that men who trusted their partners did not conduct embankment interrogations, and that his insecurity was exactly the kind of thing that made me need space. He did not follow when I walked on. He stayed at the path for a minute, hands in his jacket pockets looking at the river. When we got home and Zara was settled, I found Nate in the living room with his laptop open, and before I could say anything, he looked up and asked what the Saturday toast was about. He said if it involved their relationship, he deserved to know in advance, and he offered to hear just the first line. I told him it was a surprise and surprises required trust, and that if he could not give me that he was showing me something about himself. He said only that he hoped the toast reflected what they actually were to each other, and then he went to the kitchen without waiting for an answer. On the counter, his phone lit up with a notification preview that read a street name and a time, 8:30 in the morning, and he picked it up before I could cross the room and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I told myself it was a work calendar, the feeling that it might not stay with me like a sound in a wall all night. The next morning I met Lena at the Meridian Grind, a coffee shop downtown where the espresso machine runs constantly and the menu is written in heavy chalk letters behind the register, and I read the toast draft from my phone in full voice with all the pauses. Lena laughed twice, then stopped. She asked whether Marcus knew he was the punchline. I said Marcus was a good sport. She pushed her cup aside and asked whether Nate knew what the toast was about. I said no, and that was the point. And that honesty was my brand, and people loved it when someone finally said what everyone else only thought. She said she loved me, but she thought this might hurt someone. I said brave people say what timid people think. And then I changed the subject, and she stirred her coffee and looked at the chalkboard and did not disagree, which I took for agreement. That afternoon I came home to find the kitchen unusually tidy. Nate's keys were on a new hook near the balcony door instead of the bowl by the entrance where they had lived for 3 years. His satchel was zipped and hanging on the same hook. On the counter next to the cutting board sat a thin brown envelope labelled Household, in his handwriting, unsealed, and inside it were printed bank statements with certain charges ringed in faint pencil. Just graphite, not ink, the kind of mark made by someone who planned to photograph the page without leaving anything obvious. 2 of the charges were from an East Side bar on the same Thursday I had told him was a client event. He was making dinner, and when I asked what the envelope was, he said he was organising household paperwork and checking that the figures were accurate. I told him reviewing my spending without asking was a violation of my privacy. He said the joint account belonged to both of them and accuracy mattered. I told him his annual review attitude made me feel audited rather than loved, and he handed me a plate and said dinner was ready, and the envelope sat on the counter between us like something that had been invited to the meal. He sat across from me at the table and asked, in a way that was careful and not theatrical, about 2 things he had noticed in the past 2 weeks. The first was that I had changed my phone passcode 3 Thursdays ago, when I used to leave it unlocked. The second was that since the group chat incident with the voice message, Marcus had not replied to anything in the group they all shared. He said this was not jealousy. He was describing a pattern. And he asked me to tell him what the relationship with Marcus actually involved right now, and why the voice note explaining the Marsden evening had existed at all. I said patterns were what insecure people invented when they went looking for something to be hurt by, and that I was not going to deconstruct my friendships over a dinner. He asked again, for the second time, whether I would share even one line of the Saturday toast. He said if it was about their relationship, he deserved to hear it in advance. I told him he would hear it like everyone else, and that surprises required a little faith. He leaned back and said he hoped the toast showed what they actually were to each other, and I recognized the phrase because he had used it the night before, and I had not answered it then either. He said nothing more after that. He cleared his plate. After dinner, I passed his desk and the laptop screen had not gone dark. A cloud storage window was open, a folder titled Archive D, with 3 items already inside it. He minimized it immediately, not knowing I had seen it from the hallway. I stood in the dark and told myself it was a work backup. In the morning, I opened the shared family app to check Zara's preschool schedule and found that the Thursday pickup for the following week had been marked with a small check mark and no second name attached. He had arranged it himself, without asking me, without leaving a gap for negotiation. He had never done that before. I stared at the schedule for a long time and could not find a way to make it feel like nothing. The Galleria rooftop garden bar was beautiful on Saturday evening, in the way that places are when you have planned something for them. String lights threaded through the overhead trellis, potted olive trees at the corners, a long bar along the eastern wall, and a small raised step near the centre that was just high enough to make a person visible to 40 other people. Dominic had invited everyone we knew. Nate's sister Priya was there, having come up from her neighbourhood. Marcus was near the far trellis railing with 2 other guests, holding a beer, not looking at me. Lena found me at the drink station before the speeches and said, one more time, that she thought I should reconsider. I shook my head. I said the room was ready. I could feel it. I stepped onto the raised step and clinked my glass with a spoon, and the talking faded and 40 faces turned toward me. I started with genuine warmth. I talked about Dominic's loyalty, his years of friendship, the way he showed up for people, and a few people laughed and raised their glasses, and Nate watched from the bar with his glass in his hand and something in his face that I would not let myself read clearly. Then I said I wanted to be honest about something, because that was who I was, and I believed that real people said real things. I said I was the kind of woman men noticed. I said my husband's closest friend had noticed me at a house party 6 months ago and kissed me, and I had let it happen, and the feeling of being truly seen had been something I had forgotten was possible. I said I was telling this story not to embarrass anyone, but because I believed people spent too much time pretending, and I had chosen my husband over the moment, and I thought that choice deserved to be celebrated. Nobody laughed. The silence that arrived was not the comfortable quiet before applause. It was the held breath of a room that had just heard something it could not unhear. Dominic set his glass down on the table. Priya took one step toward Nate. Marcus looked at the olive tree beside him and did not move and did not speak. Nate stood at the bar with his glass at chest height, completely still, his expression something I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not tears, just a door closing in a room I thought I owned. A woman near the far table said, quietly but clearly, that this was not the place. Dominic stood and said with restraint that they should probably move on and thank the kitchen for the food, and people began looking at their plates. I tried to recover. I said something about how being desirable was not a crime, and that everyone in the room had wanted someone they should not, and the attempt made the silence worse rather than better. Lena kept filming on her phone. She had started recording as a party memory, and she did not lower it. She filmed the silence. Marcus put his beer on the railing and walked off the rooftop and went down the stairs, and in the stairwell he recorded a voice note to himself, 42 seconds, naming the location and the date and the time, 8:17 in the evening, and stating clearly that he had not participated in any ongoing situation and had not agreed to be named publicly. He saved it with the timestamp and went down to the parking level. The party ended earlier than it should have. People left in small groups with brief hugs and careful non-eye contact. Priya stayed close to Nate. Nate stayed near the trellis corner where Marcus had been standing and spoke quietly to guests who came to him, thanked Dominic, and did not look at me for the rest of the evening. I circulated and told people I had been ironic, that the whole point was choosing your husband, that it was a compliment, and people nodded in the careful way that means they have already decided something and are just waiting for you to finish. In the parking garage beneath the building, under the orange safety strips on the ceiling, Nate stopped walking and asked me what outcome I had expected, not why, just what outcome, when I told 40 people, including his family and his closest friend, that I had felt more alive in a stolen moment than I did in our marriage. I said I had wanted people to understand that real love is a choice, not a default. He said naming him as the lesser option in front of 40 witnesses was not a love story, and that he needed me to understand what that actually meant before we walked through our front door. I said I had not called him lesser. He said the distinction did not hold. In the car on the way home, a voice message arrived from Lena. She was sending me the party video. She was not trying to cause trouble, but she wanted me to see it before someone else sent it to Nate. The file arrived 47 seconds of footage, starting mid-toast, ending in the silence, the camera completely steady. 2 days after the party, Priya called and asked me to come to her apartment, and I went. And when I sat down at her small kitchen table, she placed her phone between us and played 17 seconds of Marcus's stairwell recording. I could hear my own voice in the background saying the word alive, and then Priya stopped it. She asked if I understood what that audio meant. I said Marcus had no right to record a private moment. She said the issue was not the recording. She said she loved me, but she was not going to pretend she had not heard what she heard, and that Nate was not insecure or dramatic. He was a person whose wife had told 40 people, including his family, that she had felt more alive with his closest friend. She said she wanted to hear my version before she took any position. I recognized the opening and I took it. I softened my voice and said I had been feeling invisible inside the marriage, that Nate's quietness had always made me feel like I had to perform to be seen, that the toast was a mistake, and I already regretted the way it landed. I said I missed who we were at the beginning, and I was willing to try couples counseling if Nate was willing to meet me halfway. I let a little of it show in my face, the exhaustion, the longing, because those feelings were real enough to carry, even if the timing and the purpose were not honest. Priya listened without reaching across the table. She said that what I had just described, feeling invisible, was something I should say to Nate, not to her, because she was his sister and not a mediator. Then she asked one question. Was Marcus at the house party 6 months ago, the night I had told Nate I was staying at my mother's overnight? The question sat between us on the table. I looked at the tablecloth. Priya said she thought so. She stood and said she loved me, and the conversation was over. That Sunday at Clifton's house, Nate's father, 64 and retired, a man who said almost nothing at meals and passed dishes and refilled water without commentary. The dinner table had the particular stillness of a room where too much had been said in other places. Zara sat between us in her booster chair and ate with the focused attention of a small child who has no idea what the adults around her are measuring. At one point, she asked why Marcus' uncle had not come. Nate said he was busy. Zara said he always brought her a stone from somewhere. She held up 2 fingers and described a green one from the river and an orange one from a place she could not pronounce. Clifton looked at his plate, then at Nate, and put his fork down without speaking. After the meal, when Priya and Nate were in the kitchen, I tried to speak with Clifton alone. I told him I wanted to explain the toast. He held up one hand very gently and said he did not need an explanation. He said that in 40 years of marriage, he had never said his wife's name in front of a crowd in a way she would not have chosen for herself. Then he picked up the serving dishes and went to the kitchen, and that was all he said to me for the rest of the evening. 2 days later, Nate sat with me in the apartment and asked, with Zara's preschool app history on his phone screen, why the Thursday pickup had been rescheduled by me for 3 consecutive weeks without explanation and where I had been on those Thursdays. He said he was not making a case. He was asking what the pattern was and who else was aware of it. I said I had late client calls and he always made a production of minor schedule changes. He asked calmly for one transparent and checkable answer about the house party 6 months ago. Whose house? What address? Who else could confirm Marcus was there? He said he was not accusing her of anything without facts. I told him cross-examining me about a 6-month-old social event was obsessive, that his need for evidence was the problem, and that I had always been the honest one in the relationship, and his behavior was turning me into someone who did not want to be. He nodded once. He picked up Zara's jacket from the sofa arm and folded it. At Zara's preschool at 4:15 that Thursday, I arrived to find that Nate had already collected her at 3:45, the early pickup time we had once discussed for busy weeks, which I did not know was active. The teacher said his name with a small smile, as if this were routine, as if he had been doing this for a while. I opened the family app and saw the notification he had added the previous week. I had dismissed it without reading it. I stood on the covered porch with the paper butterflies on the door and listened to the sound of children through the wall and could not find a reframe that made the scheduled checkmark feel like anything other than preparation. 3 days after the preschool incident, I was at my desk at the studio when the family app sent a notification for a new calendar entry Nate had added. The entry read, Langford Place, 10 a.m. No meeting title, no context, just a street and a time. I searched the address on my phone. The results showed a building management and professional services office in the financial district. I stared at the result long enough that my studio colleague Preet, at the next desk with her headphones on, would have been able to see my face had she looked up. I closed the browser. The juice bar on the ground floor sent the hum of a blender up through the ventilation, long and mechanical, filling the silence under my thoughts. A message arrived from Lena. Had I sent the party video to anyone else? She wrote back, no, followed by a pause, then a second message saying that Marcus had forwarded his stairwell voice note to Priya, and Priya had told her that morning. I put my phone face down on the small cracked phone stand at the edge of my desk, a cheap disc with a hairline fracture at the base joint that held the phone at a slight angle, and I looked at the studio wall and made a decision that felt, at the time, like power. That evening, I wrote a message to the shared friend group, Dominic, Lena, Marcus, and 3 others, saying I wanted to clarify the toast, that people had been misreading a performance piece about desire and choice, that Nate's response had been outsized and controlling, and that she was tired of being treated as guilty for saying something genuinely true. I attached a link to a personal essay I had written in the previous 48 hours, titled with no names, describing a marriage where a husband's silence was a form of control and his calmness a performance of power. I posted the essay to my Instagram. I tagged it honest and real talk. The post received 46 reactions within 2 hours, mostly from people who knew nothing about the party. Dominic read the group message and called Nate that same evening to tell him it existed and give him the timestamp. Marcus screenshotted it. Priya screenshotted the Instagram post and sent it to a folder she had already been adding to. When Nate came home that night, he sat across from me at the living room table and asked, without raising his voice, whether I understood that writing about their marriage publicly, without his knowledge, was a different category of action from the party toast, that it was not honesty, it was narrative management. He asked if I had posted the essay to control what their mutual friends believed about me. I switched my approach. I made my voice even and reasonable. I said I was allowed to process my own experiences publicly, that I had been socially isolated by his family's reaction, and that I was genuinely willing to take the post down if he would agree to counselling and ask Priya to apologise. I held his gaze. I looked like someone being patient. He waited until I finished, and then he said he would not be negotiating the terms of a counselling offer that was tied to a post I should not have made in the first place. He said he heard that I wanted to try. Then he asked, for the last time, whether Marcus had been at the overnight house party on the night I had told him I was at my mother's. I held his eyes. I said it was complicated. He nodded once, slowly, and that was the end of it. He asked me one more thing before the conversation closed. He said, in a voice that was level all the way through, that he had organised everything he needed to handle this situation properly and that he intended to handle it that way. He said this was not a threat and not the beginning of a speech. He said he was going to do what needed to be done and that she would be informed in the correct way at the correct time. And he asked if she understood. I told him he was performing something for my benefit, and I was not impressed. He said goodnight and went to bed. That night, I passed the coat rack near the front door. His everyday jacket was there, but his long winter coat, the formal one I helped him choose for work presentations, was not on the rack. It was in the closet on a separate hanger with a dry cleaning tag bearing a handwritten date from 2 weeks ago. The coat had been cleaned and hung and was waiting. I stood looking at the tag for a long time. The next morning I opened the family app and found the entire following week's preschool schedule already filled in by Nate. Every pickup, every drop-off, every activity, complete and confirmed, with no gaps left for me to negotiate. It did not need my input. It had not been written for me. 3 days after the evening he said he would handle things properly, I decided to go to his office building at noon. I told myself I was going to talk to him, that I would find him at the lobby coffee counter where he sometimes took his midday break, and that we would have the honest conversation that would reset everything. I wore the coat I had worn to the Galleria on the night of the party, which I did not notice until I was standing outside. The building is a glass-fronted tower in the financial district, 12 stories with a full reception desk and a security scanner near the entrance. I signed in at the front desk and gave his name. The receptionist typed into the system and said she would notify him. I stepped back and waited near the elevator bank beside a low display table with a potted fern. The lobby smelled of floor cleaner and coffee. A man in a plain charcoal jacket crossed from the main entrance, confirmed my full name, and handed me a sealed envelope and a thinner document in a clear sleeve. He said I had been served, and he was already walking toward the exit before I had broken the seal. Inside, a formal divorce petition, a motion for temporary financial protection orders, including a freeze on the joint account and temporary property division, and a hearing date printed clearly at the top, 17 days from today. Attached as exhibits, Lena's party video with its original metadata, Marcus's stairwell voice note transcribed and sourced, Dominic's written statement about the group message, and a 12-item log of every dialogue attempt Nate had made between the Riverside embankment and the living room, each one with a date, a location, and a brief, accurate description of how I had responded. The log was not angry. It was precise. A colleague of Nate's, David, whom I had met once at an open day, passed through the lobby with 2 coffees and slowed his pace when he saw my face. He kept walking. The receptionist confirmed that I was not on the day's authorized visitor list and that Mr. Farrow had a meeting that had started 4 minutes ago. I said I was his wife. She said she understood and I was still not on the list. What I had believed was power, the performance, the public approval, the confidence that his calm was weakness, was not a structure. He had been collecting facts while I collected reactions. The document in my hand was built from every room I had walked into and owned, including the rooms where he had asked me, very quietly, to tell him the truth. Closure snapshot. The first custody exchange happens on a Saturday morning at the apartment door. Nate arrives at 8, on time, in the winter coat, and Zara runs to him and shows him a flat grey stone she found near the studio. He says it is a good one and puts her in the car seat himself. He turns back and nods once at the doorway. Not warm, not cold, just the acknowledgement of 2 people who will have to be functional. The family app pings. Sunday return confirmed, 4 in the afternoon. The apartment is quiet. The dish rack holds 1 mug, 1 plate, 1 glass. The second hook by the balcony door where his jacket used to hang is empty. The morning light comes through the window and touches the floor, and the floor looks like the beginning of something, which is not the same as it being one.